understood. Here is your full script paraphrased, with word order shifted, sentence structures rearranged, and phrases varied, while keeping the same dramatic tone, same meaning, and same articulate historical documentary style. I preserved every detail but rewrote the entire narration in a fresh, natural way. ## paraphrased version, complete script. In the chronicles of Roman history, few emperors have stirred as much debate or curiosity as Marcus Aurelius Antoninus Augustus, remembered by posterity as Elagabalus. Barely 14, this Syrian teenager rose to command the most dominant empire the world had yet witnessed, bringing with him customs and personal habits that unsettled even Rome's famously diverse society. What followed was a 4-year rule that challenged nearly every Roman convention, political, social, and religious alike. The tale of Elagabalus is not simply one of youthful indulgence or imperial extravagance, it marks a dramatic clash between Eastern traditions and Western expectations, between established Roman norms and radical forms of self-expression. His rule exposed deep fractures within Roman culture and fed into the broader crisis that would define the troubled 3rd century. To grasp just how disruptive Elagabalus truly was, we must first understand the world into which he emerged. The early decades of the 3rd century brought unprecedented transformation to Rome. Although the empire reached its furthest borders under Trajan, structural weaknesses were beginning to surface. Economic troubles, military threats from frontier tribes, and political instability created an age of uncertainty. The Severan dynasty, the family into which Elagabalus was born, had already introduced Syrian and African influences into Roman politics. Septimius Severus, his great-great-uncle, had secured his dynasty through sheer military force, and his successors similarly depended on the army to maintain power. This reliance on military support is key to understanding how a Syrian adolescent priest ultimately ended up ruling Rome. Syria, Elagabalus' homeland, had for millennia been a crossroads of civilizations, Greek, Persian, Roman, and Semitic influences intertwined there. Its religious traditions stretched far deeper into antiquity than Rome's own. Among these beliefs stood the cult of the solar deity Elagabal, whose priest the young emperor once was. The worship of Elagabal centered around a revered black meteorite. Housed in a grand temple in Emesa, this god was associated with kingship, fertility, and the sun. Its rituals, rich with music, dance, and ceremonies alien to Roman practice, were central to Syrian culture. Priests of this cult wielded extraordinary power, not only spiritually but politically. Julia Domna, the influential Syrian empress and wife of Septimius Severus, had already brought elements of this Eastern culture into Rome. Her sister Julia Misa and her nieces Julia Soemias and Julia Mamaea continued that legacy, exercising authority well beyond traditional Roman expectations for women. This powerful network of Syrian women would engineer the rise of Elagabalus. The political conditions allowing a teenage priest to seize the imperial throne began with the murder of Caracalla in 217 AD. Macrinus, the Praetorian prefect responsible for the assassination, took power but quickly lost the loyalty of Rome's eastern legions. Sensing opportunity, Julia Misa, exiled by Macrinus, began plotting her family's return. She spread the rumor that her grandson Elagabalus was the secret child of Caracalla. Whether true or not, the claim provided the dynastic legitimacy needed to challenge the reigning emperor. The boy's striking resemblance to Caracalla and his captivating Eastern charisma made him an ideal rallying figure for discontented troops. The uprising erupted in May 218 AD at a legionary encampment near Emesa. Julia Misa, having bribed many soldiers and officers with lavish promises, prepared the ground carefully. When Elagabalus appeared before the 3rd Gallic Legion wearing imperial purple and proclaiming himself Caracalla's son, the troops acclaimed him emperor. Rebellion swept across the eastern provinces as word spread of the teenager's lineage and the rewards he offered. Caught off guard by the speed of the revolt, Macrinus attempted to crush it militarily, but his forces were routed at Antioch in June 218 AD. With legion after legion defecting, Macrinus fled toward Italy, only to be captured and executed. Thus, at 14, Elagabalus became master of Rome. Yet the true architects of his power, Julia Misa and Julia Soemias, held the real authority behind the scenes. They understood that long-term survival required carefully balancing the army's loyalty with the Senate's cooperation. What they failed to foresee was the independent agenda their young protégé would soon pursue. The journey from Syria to Rome took more than a year, during which the emperor consolidated support and unveiled the first signs of his unusual character. Unlike earlier child rulers who left decisions to their guardians, Elagabalus sought to exercise authority personally. He executed supporters of Macrinus, elevated his own allies to high offices, and increasingly displayed behaviors that troubled Roman observers. Reports spread of exotic rituals, unconventional dress, and ambitions to reshape Roman religion. Traditional Romans, already wary of Eastern customs, braced for what this foreign priest-emperor might impose. When Elagabalus entered Rome in 219 AD, he did so not as a triumphal Roman general but as an Eastern monarch, surrounded by Syrian splendor. His appearance alone stunned the capital: silk garments, ornate makeup, and jewelry no Roman man would dare wear. More alarming was what he carried with him, the sacred black stone of Elagabal, transported from Emesa to be enshrined on the Palatine Hill. To Romans, elevating a foreign god above their own deities was unthinkable. The religious revolution Elagabalus launched was unprecedented. He declared Elagabal superior to Jupiter, demanded traditional gods be subordinated, and installed himself as the god's high priest. Daily ceremonies, filled with ecstatic dancing, unusual music, and elaborate processions, now dominated life in the capital. Roman elites found these rituals disturbing, even sacrilegious. The gender and sexual aspects of these practices created even more scandal. Syrian religious traditions often incorporated gender-fluid symbolism, which clashed violently with Roman norms. Elagabalus participated in these rites wearing feminine clothing and adopting mannerisms considered shocking. His marriages only heightened the controversy. He wed Julia Paula, divorced her within a year, and then married Aquilia Severa, a consecrated Vestal Virgin, violating one of Rome's holiest taboos. Even more sensational were his relationships with male lovers, including a charioteer named Hierocles and later an athlete named Zodicus. Ancient writers claim he held formal wedding ceremonies with these partners, taking the role of bride. Accounts even describe him offering vast rewards to any physician capable of transforming him into a woman, an element modern historians debate but acknowledge as significant. Politically, these actions had enormous implications. Senators were compelled to attend rituals they considered humiliating. The emperor abandoned traditional military values, appearing at inspections in Eastern robes and placing civilian priests in command roles, angering Rome's officer corps. Economically, the empire suffered under extravagant spending. Grand ceremonies, lavish gifts, and massive building projects drained the treasury. Banquets displayed unmatched excess, with Roman moralists comparing them to, or surpassing, the worst excesses of Nero and Caligula. Court politics became tangled as Syrian courtiers, Roman elites, and military commanders all competed for influence. The palace itself was reshaped into a Syrian-styled religious complex, centered around the sacred stone. Imperial business frequently halted due to endless rituals. Romans forced to participate grew resentful. Diplomats were offended, foreign powers confused, and Rome's standing weakened. Among the general population, initial fascination turned to hostility. Traditional festivals were altered, the beloved gladiatorial games were transformed into religious pageants few enjoyed. Taxes rose to fund the emperor's religious ambitions, and frontier defenses were neglected. Rebellions appeared in some western provinces, and Roman generals voiced increasing concern over the emperor's priorities. The breaking point came when Elagabalus attempted reforms that undermined traditional family structures and moral expectations. His grandmother Julia Misa, concerned for the dynasty's survival, secretly began organizing a replacement, his cousin Alexander Severus. Alexander, young and pliable, lacked the controversial religious associations of his cousin. Support for him spread rapidly among senators, military leaders, and palace officials. By early 222 AD, a conspiracy had formed, uniting Praetorian commanders, senators, and even members of the imperial household. Elagabalus, increasingly paranoid and volatile, responded to criticism with harsher punishments and more intense ceremonies. But the momentum against him became irreversible. On March 11, 222 AD, he traveled with Alexander to the Praetorian camp, unaware the guards had already declared for his cousin. When he arrived, the soldiers rejected him openly. In the chaos that followed, Elagabalus attempted to flee, but the plotters had anticipated every escape. The once absolute ruler was cut down by multiple attackers. His mother shared his fate. Their bodies were dragged through the streets, the treatment reserved for traitors, before being thrown into the Tiber. In the aftermath, Rome swiftly eliminated all traces of his reforms. The sacred stone returned to Syria, temples were rededicated, and ceremonial excesses abolished. Alexander Severus, guided by Julia Mamaea and Julia Maesa, reinstated traditional Roman norms. Damnatio Memoriae attempted to erase Elagabalus entirely, though his story survived in literature, legend, and cultural memory. Ancient historians painted him as a monster of depravity. Medieval writers echoed that judgment. Modern scholars, however, recognize the biases behind these accounts. Many of the emperor's actions, though shocking to Romans, reflected sincere Syrian religious traditions. Debates continue regarding his gender identity, religious motivations, and the accuracy of ancient accusations. Some scholars interpret the descriptions as evidence of a transgender identity, others place them within Syrian ritual context. Archaeological findings from Syria reveal that practices Romans ridiculed were legitimate religious observances, not mere personal indulgence. Psychologically, Elagabalus' story is tragic, an adolescent suddenly given absolute power, torn from his homeland, and thrust into a culture hostile to his traditions. His inability to adapt or compromise sealed his fate. His reign left a lasting cultural mark. The clash between Eastern and Western values he embodied foreshadowed transformations the empire would face in later centuries. Though vilified, he remains one of history's most intriguing figures, part cautionary tale, part misunderstood revolutionary, part symbol of Rome's complex multicultural identity. In trying to reshape Rome according to his own beliefs, Elagabalus accelerated his downfall, but also created a historical enigma that continues to challenge and fascinate scholars nearly 2 millennia later.